Now, in the previous video, we found the standard deviations for exam 1 and for exam 2. Before we go into question 2, let's talk about the empirical rule of a normal curve. Data that fits into a normal distribution would follow a curve basically like this, where you have your mean right in the middle of the curve. And then once this would be plus 1 standard deviation, and this would be minus 1 standard deviation. So for exam 1, our mean was 77, and we would add 12 for 1 standard deviation above, and we would subtract 12 for 1 standard deviation below. The empirical rule says that 34% of the data will fall between the mean and 1 standard deviation above. Another 34% of the data will fall between the mean and 1 standard deviation below. So 68% of all the data values, if it is a normal curve, will fall between 1 standard deviation above and 1 standard deviation below the mean. So if this is my mean here, we're going to put the mu there, and this is a normally distributed type curve, here's plus 1 standard deviation, and here's minus 1 standard deviation. 34% of your data values will fall in here, and 34% of your data values will fall in here. So furthermore, if you go out 2 standard deviations, let's go out here, plus 2 standard deviations. So if we had test 1 was 77, was our mean, 77 plus 12, 1 standard deviation brought us to an 89. 77 minus 12, another standard deviation, that would bring us down to 65. The empirical rule says that an additional 13.5% will fall in this range, and another 13.5% will fall within this range, plus 2 standard deviations or minus 2 standard deviations. That is, so what is 13.5 plus 34 plus 34 plus 13.5? 95% of all the data will fall up or down 2 standard deviations. So this is an extra 2.5%, and this is an extra 2.5%. And in fact, it's 2.31 for the next standard deviation and 0.15 here. 2.35 here and 0.15 for more standard deviations. But that's what that's saying. That's why knowing the mean and what the standard deviation is will tell you basically how far out this data is spread. All right, so now given that information, we're ready to move on to question 2. According to numerous online resources, the mean height for American women is 5 feet 5 inches and a standard deviation of 3.5 inches. Using the empirical rule, what's the probability that a randomly chosen American woman is between 5 feet 1.5 inches and 5 feet 8.5 inches? All right, so here's my mean, 5, 5. They tell me that a standard deviation is 3.5 inches, so add 3.5 inches here. So that's going to be 5 foot 8.5 inches, and subtract 1.5 inches, so that's going to be 5 foot 1.5 inches. Just doing a ballpark here. Here's my mean. This is 34% of the data will fall in here, and 34% of the data will fall in here. Using the empirical rule, what is the probability that a randomly chosen woman is between 5, 1.5, and 5, 8.5? 34% plus 34% is 68%, and probability we write as a decimal. So we move the decimal over 2 and remove the percent sign. Write an expression in the form P, meaning probability of this inequality, for what we found in problem 2. So the probability that the height